treat these like an employee, not like an experiment, and have a clear scope, have clear supervision and clear accountability. And that is the critical piece. You don't just go and hire someone without a position description, onboarding and induction, full training, giving them a good month to get their feet under the desk. It's the same with an agent. To go fully autonomous, it needs to earn your trust just like a new hire. So I think the big thing here is, treat an AI agent like an employee, not an experiment.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to Zero Shot, the AI podcast without the hype. And we're built for one reason, and that's to be the source that you actually trust when it comes to AI and business. And every week, we're trying to bring you the conversations, the breakdowns, the honest analysis that helps you make better decisions in the space. I'm James Gauci, the CEO of Cadent. We build and govern AI systems in high-stakes circumstances. And this is episode 29, and I am joined, as always, by the one and only Llew Jury. Llew, how's it going, mate?
G'day, James, and hello to everybody all over the world, and a big welcome to anybody joining this episode and pod for the very first time. I'm Llew Jury, the Managing Director of Advancer, where we build AI for all Australian businesses. And yeah, James, we're two people who live inside this crazy industry every single day. We know what all the noise is going around, and it can seem genuinely, overwhelming to everybody right now. And the big message is that we're all in this together, and this is why we actually built this pod called Zero Shot. And for everybody who's out there looking for a steady hand through the AI revolution.
Yep, and agents are the word on everybody's lips right now, Llew. Yeah. It's almost the word of the year. If you've sat in a meeting nodding along about autonomous AI agents without being totally sure what one actually is, you're not alone, because most people are in exactly that position. And, this is a topic that's come up a few times over the course of the last several episodes, isn't it, Llew? And when we talked about prompting, we were talking about agentic features that we take into account when prompting systems. And we promised that we'd come back to open it up properly. So this is that episode. Welcome back. And the goal today is that by the end of the episode, you'll know what an agent really is, what it can do in your business, what it might not be able to do yet or shouldn't be able to do yet, and where you might draw the line so you get as much value as possible without any of the associated mess.
Yeah, mess is the key word, James, isn't it? And, we're going to go through 3 core moves today. And the first one's going to be actually what an agent is and how you build one. And secondly, how these agents truly work and where they fall apart all the time. This is the mess part, of course. And the third one is, the one decision that matters most before you actually hand over real work that you're doing right now to an agent. So yeah, let's get into it.
Fantastic. And just before we get into the core of what we're working on today, let's give a quick shout out to Prompt Cowboy. An agent is only as good as the instructions that you give it, and vague instructions are where an agent goes wrong usually. Prompt Cowboy helps you build a precise, structured prompt before you put it to work. So use the agent setting in the chat window over at promptcowboy.ai, Llew.
Yeah, awesome. Let's get into some news or tools of the week, James. What's been on your radar this week?
Look, tool of the week for me is actually the CLI tools. And so for those out there who are on the less technical side, a CLI tool is a command line interface tool. So it's like the back end of computer systems, where you remember the days of MS-DOS where you used to type commands into the black and white screen or what have you.
I think banks are still doing that, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
Still doing,
Well, all of us kind of agentic engineering types, we're right back in the command line again. And command line tools are a great way to get full and unfettered access to certain kinds of systems. And the CLI tool that I used last week to set up a client environment was the Microsoft Azure CLI tool, which I was using to create custom agents in our sandbox test environment, so that we could populate those test environments and help enable our training sessions and make sure that they were nice and contextual and had good synthetic data that we could refer to and things like that. And so when we were able to plug Claude Code into the CLI tool for Microsoft Azure, it set up our entire sandbox environment perfectly and gave us some great material to chew on as we've been going through our workshops over the last few weeks. So that's my tool of the week. And if you're want to try something new and you're getting to grips with Claude Code a little bit, try asking or any of the agentic harnesses, by the way, certainly ask it what CLI tools you might be able to use. And you might find some nice new capabilities that you can get your AI agents to exercise, Lou. How about you?
Yeah, there's a number for me, and that's really interesting, that CLI one. Claude Code is the main one, but interesting that you're getting into the Azure side, the Microsoft side, and I think they're really starting to, come together with their strategy. Even a week after we did our tier list, I'm seeing a lot of good things coming out of Microsoft too. So yeah, stay tuned for that, and it's going to be interesting to watch what they do on their journey. So yeah, look, two things for me. One was N8N. It's a workflow automation builder. There's been some big releases, recently, and they've got now native MCP support, which is basically connecting straight in and allowing for AI workflows to actually be joined to model context protocols. So that's connecting up all your key data and things like that. So it's massive for a human in the loop approval process. We haven't had that previously with these sort of automation tools like N8N. And basically these workflows become an agent that, can call, and you can make it stop, and you can ask a person before they do anything next, and all these sort of really cool things that the other agent harnesses like Claude can actually do with the sort of the hand and the human. So the other one, James, is everybody should now hit refresh on their Claude in the browser. We've got Cowork in the browser. So that's actually cool. That's come out in the last few days. You don't have to go to the app for Claude, and you can actually use Cowork in the browser, and that's a bit of a game changer. That is, heading towards where they're all going. Microsoft Cowork does the same, of course, but yeah, and ChatGPT with their work as well. So everybody in their agent harnesses has gone in browser, and that's incredibly exciting. So let's get into it, but we've just got a quick thing before we start, James. One quick
note. One of the things that we would love to let you know is that we would prefer to make episodes for you rather than at you, if that makes sense. So if there's an idea that you have for an episode, or if you have feedback for us and on format or anything like that, there's a 60-second survey linked in the description of this podcast. It takes less time than a coffee order, and it directly shapes what we're going to cover over the next little while. So make sure that you head over to the description on this video or in this podcast that you're listening to on the platform of your choice, and click the link and fill out that form. And that'll help us bring you more highly relevant content that's up to date, and we can use us as your agent, send us out onto the front lines of the AI landscape to bring back the juicy tips and hints and techniques that we can find for you. So definitely go and fill that out.
Awesome. Let's get into it, James.
All right.
What's an agent, and how do you build one? Let's get into it. And this segment could go for hours, couldn't it?
An agentic AI system is a continuum, and we have to kind of start with definitions, because if we start hand waving, it's going to be really hard to kind of pin it down and start to govern and scope the conversation. And the definitions that I tend to gravitate towards, the OECD's AI framework definition of an AI system. And that definition within it says that an AI system can vary in its degrees of autonomy and adaptiveness after deployment. And autonomy is one of the key words, and adaptiveness is also a key word. They both imply certain things. So autonomy implies that it can make its own decisions. It can go on, it can forge its own path. So planning is a big part of what makes something agentic. And then forging its own path, what steps is it taking? What actions is it taking? What degrees of freedom does it have? And when we talk about agentic AI at Cadent, we're usually talking about, okay, how many tools does it have access to in this system or in this interaction? What's in its context window that has been given to it by the system to augment the capabilities that it has? When it's thinking, is it thinking through the planned steps that it's going to take and then executing them step by step? Or is it a non-agentic interaction that we're having where it thinks about it, and then it produces the answer, and that's it? It doesn't go and do a web search, or it doesn't go and access your SharePoint and bring back documents, and it may not go and write some code to execute and create a document or a file or what have you. So, and those are all things that we would consider agentic. So the more tools it's got access to, the more degrees of freedom it has, the more access to information and systems, and the more ability it has to plan, the more agentic an AI system would be. Llew, when you're trying to think about agents, how do you kind of begin to think about and structure your thoughts on it?
Yeah, it's really good points you make, James. And I think from a business context, we need to just make sure that we, truly define for a business that potentially you're not using an agentic AI right now. You might be using a chatbot or an agent harness like Cowork. But, the key word that you just mentioned was autonomy. And autonomy is all about calling up the model instructions, it's calling up those tools. It's, and if it's not doing that, you're effectively not using an agent. The other thing is triggers generally are on workflows and automations, not truly agentic AI, right? And people get confused with this whole world of workflow, automation, and AI agents. And there's a lot of people actually thinking their vendors are building them, AI agents, but they're actually just automations. Now, and automation has been around, as we've talked on this pod, for a long, long time. So there's a couple of tests that we often do to sort of say, if it's a chat bot, it's just doing a question and answer, like James said, going in, retrieving information from SharePoint, coming back, or your Google Drive, or some sort of connector. And the AI over the top of that is a wrapper or an AI harness that's been pre-built for you. It's a pre-trained, that's what the ChatGPT stands for, the pre-trained, harness that basically someone else's LLM is actually then analyzing that information and returning you the response in the format that you want for your prompt. And so very different. An agent actually takes a goal and does the work. It plans itself out. It works through. So, we've been sort of the last 18 months, most people using their own, ChatGPTs and the Claudes and the Copilots and things like that. I think the first time we've now seen from a business sense that we're actually starting to see the elements of truly autonomous work that's actually starting to call up existing memory that's starting to learn is in Cowork for both Claude and also for Copilot and also the work in ChatGPT. So I think the big thing is the giveaway there for businesses is when it goes and does something like a scheduled task, you don't have to actually prompt it. Scheduled tasks are a bit of automation still, but you can actually see it in there, if this, then that. So if you want to do this, then go and do that as well. And I think that's the critical piece.
Is it making decisions? Is it taking actions based on those decisions? Is it making its own judgments, right?
Correct. Exactly. And that's the autonomy piece. So often, there's triggers and it sets up an automation, and that's not truly agentic AI. And so we're actually having to sort of step all of our clients through, look, you want us to build some AI? Absolutely. Actually, we'll build your automation here. And automations are generally a lot more cost effective, aren't they, James, in terms of doing that? So, walk me through the equation. What are the actual pieces you use to assemble to sort of actually build turn a model into actually an agent? Where do you go and actually go and do that? Talk to me about the tech and how the business approach behind that too.
So a practical example of agentic versus non-agentic is when, and you can try this yourself in your instance of Copilot or Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever. Go and ask it what color the sky is. And when it brings back its answer, have a look to see if it's made any citations or if it's done a web search. Because if in its plan to answer that question, it's decided it needs to use the web search tool in order to answer the question, what color the sky is, then it's performed an agentic action. It's used a tool to complete its work after making a plan to use that tool, retrieve data, synthesize data, and then return to you the answer to that question. And we do this in our training sessions with organizations. We get everybody to ask Copilot or Claude or whatever the same question. And we see sometimes it doesn't do a web search. Sometimes it says, look, the sky usually is blue for these reasons. And let me know if you have any other questions. That would be a non-agentic interaction because it didn't use any tools to construct its answer. It didn't access any new information or new context that you didn't have any control over already. So that's kind of, there's a bit of nuance there. But that's a bright line that you can draw between a non-agentic interaction and an agentic interaction. However, when we're talking about building an agent or building an agentic system, we are talking about whether we're giving the model access to tools, usually. So when we have a model that has the ability to reason and think and plan, is given access to tools which might allow it to do a web search or go and have a look in your SharePoint or create a new PowerPoint or create a new spreadsheet or whatever. It can plan to use those tools in executing on the intent that you've given it. So model, context, prompt, tools. If the model within its context understands that it has tools available to it, and when you prompt it, it decides that, I might be able to use that tool over there. It can go and use that tool in executing on what you wanted it to do. So that's what turns a model into an agent, is the availability and use of tools.
So basically an agent is the model plus everything you wrap around it, right? So that's the critical piece, because Claude has sort of nailed it first, didn't they, with Cowork? Claude plus access to plan and execute, as you talk about. But as everybody's been using it in chat, you haven't been actually truly using that agentic process. I really like that, and that's a really great way to sort of summarize what we've all been using. So yeah, the autonomous part, the brain though, the reasoning and the instructions you give it are where the secret sauce will actually happen, right? Because in those instructions, you can basically prompt, and this comes back to good prompting we've talked about before, using RCTF and using your prompt frameworks. If you set up the right prompt and you've got the right brain behind it from a model, you can actually then instruct and pull more out of the reasoning. And, instructions are the role of the goal and the brief and things like that. The tools are sort of the hands and the arms and the search and the files, and they do the actual sending of an email and calling other software and things like that. And memory is the continuity, right? It's and every piece doesn't start from zero. So I think the big thing is to note is autonomy is the permission to decide its own steps, and it's a dial, not a switch. So basically, and if people miss that, again, coming back to the first statement, we've been using it as a chat sort of bot as such, but not as an autonomous agent. And that's the critical piece. So I think there needs to be a bit of honesty in the market, don't you reckon, James? About people going, hey, I'm going to give you this AI and you're now using an AI agent. And the sort of, as you said in your training and our training, the penny drops when you actually explain what a true AI agent is and how, maybe a Copilot agent off the shelf is a glorified name rather than actually doing fully agentic work.
Yeah, and I think to kind of put hopefully some scope around the conversation a little bit, the definition that your organization or your team or your group or you as an individual use to describe what is and isn't an agent is very much a matter of policy at this point. Like, for example, Claude projects and Copilot agents, are they agents by the definition of your organization's policies and definitions and procedures? And the important thing from a governance perspective then is that's how you're going to, the definition is how you're going to identify and scope how you govern something. But in reality, what we're talking about is a continuum from just straight up automation, if this, then that, logical kind of process, to highly agentic, very autonomous, lots of degrees of freedom, very long running, very powerful AI agents or agentic AI systems. And so it is 100% in the eye of the beholder, and it comes down to the way that you want to define it in order to achieve the goals that you want to with AI in your organization. So, Llew, we're going to talk a little bit now about where agents work and where agents kind of tend to fall apart a little bit, because it's like with a person, you give someone too much rope, they might accidentally hang themselves with it. Where have you actually seen agents start to earn their keep? What are the things that made those particular use cases or particular systems work?
Yeah, so normally there's a couple of things there. The first one is defining where you're actually needing it and tightly scoping out what you actually need. And it's often the grunt work, the messy work. It's the back office work that is sort of, things that are, aren't getting done often, that need multi-step. And we often say, is it the hand for the human or the robot for the agent? And what's your current process here? And what are you constantly doing over and over again that you can actually put an agent in as your personal assistant to actually, take some of that decision making for you, but actually you still are the human in the lead. And so often it's, scoping it really well with clear inputs and a clear, finish. I think the finish is the critical piece. Where do you want the agent to finish? And making sure that it's in an environment there's not going to be too much risk. And we're going to talk about that in a sec, right? But risk from finance and reputation and going wrong and doing all the things we don't want it to do. So once you know what those steps are, whether they're the hand or the robot or the human or the agent, we basically, you map that out first and you find out actually whether this is actually going to fit. So you do a bit of a feasibility and viability, position on a matrix. And we also do a thing called t-shirt sizing to actually work out how big this is going to be to the organization. So the narrower the scope, the better, because if we can give the agent some clear guardrails and edge cases and guidelines about what it's allowed to do and where the human needs to get involved, then that is a critical piece. So I've seen good use cases, and I've got quite a few use cases, but even a good use case recently I saw that we've been adopting. There's quite a few that you sort of pick up and go, oh, I'm going to grab a piece of that, put it into that agent for that client. And without giving too many secrets away with sort of IP with clients and things like that, there was one that was an e-com type platform, and it had an agent always on looking for when a competitor, did something like change their shipping policy or change their delivery policy or change their refunds policy. And it then went through a series of automated tasks, so series of steps, and it did about 5 steps before it then escalated a question to the human and said, how would you like me to proceed at a branch? Yes, no decision. Would you like me to keep going with this and do even more research and go over here? Or do you want to actually do something in your business? So, the client could actually make a change. It then, once the decision was made or the yes, no response was received, it then went off and did different things based on what that feedback was, learning all of the time what was going on. Now, the next time the competitor does something, and by the way, we've got a few of these set up for various things inside different agent harnesses with different reports that come in when they get, triggered about once a week or once every 2 weeks. It actually is learning about all of that. Another example, James, is payments. When this is an automation, but into the agentic world. When we send an invoice out to Llew, last time Llew took 60 days to pay, right? Now, and we're going to go a bit harder because I've learned last time, and I'm going to be a bit more punchy in terms of how I chase all that invoice because I've learned that Llew took a bit longer last time. But James, I just send him an invoice and he takes 7 days, so he's really good. I'm not going to hassle him as much and send him texts and do all this sort of stuff. So that's where I'm starting to see it work really well, is when there's a really well-defined multi-step workflow that's got clear boundaries, it's been scoped well, generally it's back office, and it's got specific tasks it needs to do. And it actually, the feedback that comes in from the client is that is making a real difference. That is not just saving me half an hour in the morning. That is truly transforming what we do in this business. What about you, James? What about some, examples of where they work and what they do, and I suppose also the governance around this, and where can they fall apart and fail? Because it's all good to sort of give these use cases, but where do they? Yeah, give us some stories.
Yeah, so the most common way that I see that an agent project will begin to fall apart a bit is when we don't respect the nature of these probabilistic systems, and perhaps we forget that there is an error rate associated with every probabilistic system. And if you're expecting the first iteration to be perfect every time, like you may have been able to achieve in simple software projects, you're going to get a pretty rude awakening. If you're used to very big waterfalls on projects, agents are going to be very difficult to adapt your workflow to. And the lesson to learn is that you have to iterate really quickly, to go through many iterations and experiments in order to increase the instances where you get the desired result. And a lot of that comes back to problem definition and success definition on the project. Great example, there was a project that one of our clients executed with an AI agent that performed some triaging of inbound inquiries. And the expectation was that was unspoken. It was an implicit objective in this project. The expectation was that the AI was going to get it right every time. And that they came to learn was an unrealistic expectation.
Yeah.
Especially in version 0.1 that was deployed into, thankfully, not a production environment.
Yeah.
But they learned really quickly that that's actually not working the way that we expected, but we didn't articulate our expectations well enough in order to ensure that the deliverable then that we put together met those expectations. So it's because these are language models, we need to ensure that the instructions that we're giving are as explicit as they can be, and that there aren't implicit ways that the model can make an assumption and fall into a fail state. But Llew, a lot of projects get cancelled, and word on the street is that about 40% of agentic projects are getting pulled or not working out. Is it a technology failure, or is it an approach, do you think?
I think it's definitely not a technology failure. You just hit the nail on the head. It's the projects die because they were hyped up. I think there is this, and this is the anti-hype podcast, right? Because there is a lot of hype out there and a lot of yell and sell. I think we say that every single episode, that basically is like, yep, I'm going to build you an AI agent and it's going to do this amazing stuff, and you'll be able to speak into Whisperflow, and you'll be able to talk into your phone, and it's going to run off and do this amazing stuff. As version 0.1, as you said, James. That is, if I had $1 for every time I heard that, it's just incredible. It's not going to do that, people. It's not going to, from version 0.1, transform your whole business and do all the multi-step things you need it to do. Now, in the future, you might be able to do some orchestration where you have multi-agents that can go and do these different things after the principal of the business talks into the phone and says a command. It might go and do something in your CRM and trigger an invoice or something like that. So the key word here is scoping on hype, or 3 words, scoping on hype. And the other piece is it pointed at a task nobody really had measured before. So if you don't actually measure and map this out, like I was saying, scoping it properly with MAPT, which is our platform framework that we use, there's not going to be any ownership and accountability from the metrics that come back in to see whether actually it's worked or it's actually producing return on investment. And often it gets to a point, a bit like the hype cycle of websites or apps or software or things like that. No one in the business is using it, and it's actually still running in the background, costing a lot of money on tokens and API calls. And, basically it was a glorified test, glorified proof of concept, and there's been a lot of POCs around in the last few years that have been charged out at pretty big rates, but the rubber hasn't hit the road. So the big thing is, look, it's a combination of all of those. Don't blame it on the technology though. Don't blame it on the tech that's sitting there. That didn't work, that thing wasn't right. It's actually more of the human behavior side. And, I think that, sometimes you got to go into bat for the poor old tech because it wasn't the reason why the project failed.
No,
so,
bad design is always bad design. And it's like we say it a fair amount on this podcast. Just because it's AI doesn't mean we don't need to do good process management, and that we shouldn't automate processes that are broken or invent new processes on the fly because they sound like a good idea. You automate a broken process, you get broken outputs, and a lot more of them than you did before. And so I suppose the takeaway here is AI agents work best in bounded, scoped work where there's a clear approach, a clear procedure, explicit instructions, explicit conditions. They tend to fail more often in messy environments where too many objectives are implicit, right, Llew?
Look, mate, messy is the thematic of, autonomy is the theme of this pod, but basically of this episode, messy comes up. And I just wanted to quickly highlight, you said it at the start, you said it just then. If you have a messy business in terms of you're all over the shop with your processes and your people, and you don't quite have a handle on things because you're so busy and running at a rate of knots, that's sort of a messy business. No amount of AI, automation or workflow change is going to put a big fat Band-Aid on and prevent that happening. To what James just said, or what you just said, James, was about taking sort of a messy process and trying to actually bolt AI into it and automation into it. It's just not going to work, is it? And I think that's the critical piece, that there's inflated expectations in 2026. that everybody's going to get uplift here and it's all going to be awesome and we're going to be able to cancel things in 2027 and, but we haven't hit that sort of maturity yet. And I just don't, I think there's a bit of a gap, a knowledge gap between using a basic chat harness to actually building true AI, that is actually going to solve messiness in an organization.
Yeah. And I think I've mentioned this one time before on the podcast, but there's a paper that was doing the rounds about 2 months ago, for specifically small and medium business research, and AI adoption was the variable, and they introduced AI into a couple of hundred small businesses. The ones that were already high performing got an average of a 20% productivity uplift that was measurable. The ones that were already low performing got an average of a 10% decrease in productivity post AI deployment. And so this is no longer academic. This is actually happening out there in real organizations, and it should be a call to action to be better business people. Let's actually build sustainable businesses. Let's deliver quality to our customers, and remember that continuous improvement is a long journey, not a short one. It's a marathon, not a sprint. So Llew, we've kind of talked about autonomy and the line with which we define autonomy, and the fact that it's ultimately it's not tipping into one zone or another in real terms. It's only what we define it for purposes of governance, really. But for a leader who gets the promise of autonomous systems, who understands that, there's amazing capacity gains that we can get and relief we can give to an overworked workforce, but they might be nervous about the risks associated with it. Like they might be in one of those messy information environments. How do they decide what to let an agent do alone and what to keep a human on?
Risk, and more risk. Look, if it goes wrong, how is it expensive, to catch this? First of all, catch it and see that it's actually done something wrong. And then how expensive is and time to fix it. And when we say expensive, we're talking about not just your personal reputation or your professional reputation. We're talking about true, not being covered by insurance. So you don't have professional indemnity insurance coverage and things like that. You might not have cyber in your policy. Go back and have a look at your insurance policy before you put in any truly agentic AI thinking for itself within your business. If it's going to be costly or hard to undo, a payment, an e-com, a credit card, anything to do with your customers, anything a regulator and a compliance, organization would care about, got to keep a human on it. Like this is this human in the lead piece, not just human in the loop, but human in the lead. So you don't initially have to think about full automation and autonomy. You can choose between, being fully manual and fully autonomous. You can sort of sit in the area of that, if you draw a line, what could I reverse and back out, and fix? What could I use to get the agent to actually do some of the heavy lifting, as I just mentioned about the back office and the grunt work and the messy work? But this is the test that we give to everybody before you actually start building out and costly, sometimes in a costly way, starting to spend money on agents. There is a bit of a danger on LinkedIn. I'm starting to see a couple of people put out working examples of their business, and this is what we're doing. And I had a client that went away, and I put an agent in there to manage her inbox while she was away. And, she loved it so much that she wants to do it at full time, when she came back. And I'm thinking, yeah, that doesn't sound truly accurate to me. It sounds a bit over the top in terms of what the actual capability of these agents can actually do. And would you, as this test, as I say, let an agent then run your whole inbox and talk to your customers without actually you having any involvement, Joe? So these are the sort of things we're starting to see in business. And I think the key message is calm it down, look at autonomous versus manual, look at a stepped approach as a version 1.0, but don't go all in and try and outsource your whole life or your business and working life to AI agents just yet.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And, it's an intuitive, almost a rule of thumb. Like if you can't explain how the AI system came to the conclusions that it did in its plan, and if you're not prepared to stand by its output 100% of the time, are you comfortable handing it over to that particular system? Should you then hand it over to that particular system, or are you taking a gamble? And that's not to say that, nobody should ever take risks. It's more that these risks should be quantified, and you should go in with both eyes open and zero hands tied behind your back.
Yeah.
Because you've got strategic objectives and you might be prepared to take risks, but make sure you're calculating those risks and you're mitigating the ones that are cheap to mitigate, so you can maximize the benefits that you're getting. And
another point just on that, James, is it definitely build these agents, right? And the key message is we're just trying to, James and I are trying to sort of showcase the risks today, but we're super positive. We build agents all the time.
Yeah,
and
it's literally most of our businesses.
Most of our business, right? But the key message is treat these like an employee, not like an experiment, and have a clear scope, have clear supervision and clear accountability. And that is the critical piece. You don't just go and hire someone without a position description, onboarding and induction, full training, giving them a good month to get their feet under the desk. It's the same with an agent. To go fully autonomous, it needs to earn your trust, just like a new hire. So I think the big thing here is, treat an AI agent like an employee, not an experiment.
Yeah. And when an agent does go ahead and act on its own and make its plan and get it wrong, that's where good governance comes in, because it's going to help you understand who should be accountable in that scenario. And it's not always the individual, right? Like,
that's right.
The organization has a responsibility to train their people on the tools that they have access to if they are expected to use them in their work. Our government has a responsibility to help us regulate these things and get the best societal benefits out of them. The developers of these systems have a responsibility to empower their customers. And I'm not talking about a legal responsibility. I'm talking about an ethical one. Like, they have an ethical responsibility to help their customers evaluate their tools appropriately to make sure that they're going to be used effectively, and they're mostly beneficial for the people that they're claiming to help. So I agree with the notion of treating it like an employee rather than an experiment. Of course, AI isn't people, just to be clear about that, but it helps to understand that if there is a ramp-up period while you're building the trustworthiness of an AI system, that you expect to take autonomous steps, for sure.
James, what's to close out this segment, what's an agent that people could build straight away? Like, where can they apply this? Where can they apply right now an autonomous agent in their business and have their eyes open on, so it doesn't get expensive, it's easy to catch and fix, it's cheap and reversible if it runs. What would be your tip on actually going right now, opening the hood and going, right, this is where I would go? Now, I'll caveat by saying, what are you asking for, Llew? Are you asking for HR, marketing, which, is it compliance and risk, finance, operations? Where are you thinking? But how would you approach that question, James, right now? If someone said, hey, build me an agent.
The safest agent to build is one that doesn't change any data in systems of record. It's one that gathers information from disparate sources using read-only tools, and its job is to synthesize that information and provide you with citations. That, if there's a use case that you can think of where that would be useful, and it might be your organization's company handbook agent, where you can hop into the client and you can ask the company handbook agent, what is our leave policy? How do I claim my leave? Or what is our expenses policy? Like, how much can I spend on the Christmas party this year? That's a relatively low stakes situation. The key there is that it is verifiable. So you can go in and verify the facts based on those citations that the agent makes. But that's probably the lowest hanging fruit, is access to information. And the risk starts to come in where you give an autonomous system many, many degrees of freedom. The more degrees of freedom you give it, the more AI-specific risk you're introducing, because you're then relying on the model to be able to reliably select the right tools at the right times. And as we know, as we pack out the context window with more and more information, the less coherent the responses tend to be. So keep it atomic, keep it scoped, and make sure that you know what good looks like, and evaluate its output before you roll it out in production. How about you, Llew?
Yeah, no, that's really cool. And version 2, here's a hot tip. What James just talked about was absolutely spot on. You can go out there right now and hook up a connector in your Copilot, your Chat GPT or your Claude, and actually go and do what James just said and interrogate, some of that information. But here's something to make you look really good. Then go to your IT team and your managers and go, what I want to do now is I want to connect up that handbook, and I also want you guys to connect up our leave data or our payroll data. And just for me, I want to then inquire on how much leave I've got based on, my handbook and my rules behind it as well. So you actually do this next step, and that's the tools we talk about, and you're doing multi-tooling into your request. So there you go. You've heard it first. You've just got lots and lots of value. You've got thousands of dollars worth of consulting value from James and myself on how to do this. And I think everybody should actually, put it in their hands and away they go. So super exciting. What are the takeaways from this whole episode, James? What's your key takeaway today?
Look, it's classic process management. Again, I'm biased, I think, but like what is coming to mind and just with flashing lights around it for me is like that old lean process management acronym, DMAIC: define it, measure it, analyze it, implement it, control it. Like, just because it's AI doesn't mean you don't do things like that when you're changing a process. And, the more things change, the more they stay the same, Lou. How about you? What's your key takeaway, mate?
There's heaps. Like, you treat it as an employee. An agent is an employee. Treat it like that. Give it a name. That's a good first step. Put it on the org chart and treat it like you would inducting them and bring them along for the journey. But the other thing that really stood out today was, before you hand any task, ask how expensive it is going to be to catch and fix anything if it goes wrong. So, that's the key question that needs to be sorted out between the businesses that are actually, getting the value and those that aren't.
Fantastic, Lou. Well, let's draw this episode to a close. We've got an exciting new episode next week, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about it, mate.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're talking about AI decision-making next week, and we're going to move beyond productivity and into something much bigger. It's a super exciting episode. Every business is, just a series of decisions, right? Who to hire, what to do, where to invest, what opportunities to pursue, which risks to avoid, and what happens when AI becomes part of that process. So next week, we're going to explore how business leaders should be thinking about AI as a decision-making partner, not a decision maker for them, because it's starting to creep in a bit, I think, where it actually is going to add enormous value to your business. So, and of course, where it leads you astray and does all that. So, yeah, do not miss next week's episode 30. James, can't believe we're at episode 30, mate.
And thanks again to the team at Prompt Cowboy. If today's session made you think about how to actually get your team using AI properly, go and check out their Agentic prompting feature, because it's a practical starting point that a lot of organizations are missing. So trot on over to promptcowboy.ai, Lou.
Awesome. And thank you for joining Zero Shot. That's it for today's session. And look, it's a big thank you for not just listening, but for staying with us all the way through. And this means everything to us. And it's what keeps this show going, James.
Yeah, we built the show on giving you the right information, delivered straight up, no BS, at the right time.
No BS.
And if you get that, we think that can change how an entire generation of businesses navigate this revolution. So we're for the builders, the skeptics, the strategists, everyone in between who's trying to make sense of the AI space. And you're probably someone who's trying to move the needle in your industry or your organization. So we're doing it for you. That's why we're here.
Yeah. And if you're confused about anything we've taught about or anything out there, if there's a topic you cannot find any straight answers on, if you heard something today that you thought, I need to understand that better, then tell us. So leave a comment below, send us a message, drop us a line, wherever you're going to find us. We do read everything, we share it, we actually catch up on it. And we promise you this, if you have a question and someone else does too, then we're going to build an episode around it. We've done that with many people like Ben Cooper, one of our recent guests. And this is how this show just gets better. You're a key part of it.
Yeah, fantastic. And we're starting to get some really exciting applications from people throughout the industry and listeners out there who'd love to join us on the pod. So if that's you, make sure you get in touch. So if today was useful for you, and we hope it was, the best thing you can do right now is follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, wherever you're listening. It costs you nothing. It's what keeps us in front of more people who need it, like you. Find us on our LinkedIn page, search Zero Shot on there, or search either Llew Jury or James Gauci, myself. Give us a follow. Go to zeroshot.com.au. Of course, we're on Instagram and Facebook and TikTok, and we have weekly short form content. If you're having a busy week, it's a great way to consume some key moments really quickly. And if there's someone in your world who's trying to navigate AI right now, and you feeling a bit overwhelmed by it all, share this episode with them, because that's how we grow and that's how we help more people, Lou.
Sure is, mate. And one more shout out to our amazing producer, Yenny Larotta. Thank you so much. And that's it from us today. Stay sharp, stay sovereign, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Take care, everyone.